Hello friends, we continue in John Newton, Letters of a Slave Trader Freed by God's Grace, and we're on to chapter 4. My dear Harveys, you have asked for a more explicit account of my courtship. Let me tell you how it stood at the time I left England. When Mary's family discovered that I had sincere interest in their daughter, no one considered it seriously. It served for tea-table talk among our friends, and nothing further was expected from it. But when after 2 years my desire for her had not lessened, and especially as it provoked me to act rather impetuously, her family began to consider the seriousness of my intentions. They were quite conscious of the coolness that still existed between their family and my father, and they rightly discerned that my father had not been consulted. When I said my last goodbye, her mother told me, with as much affection as if I'd been her own child, that she had no objections, that when both of us were older, there might be a very real probability that her daughter and I could get together. But as things stood then, she thought she should interfere. She said she did not want me to come back unless her daughter was away from home. That would be the case until I either gave up my intentions or assured her that I had my father's express consent to go on with our courtship. It was all so difficult. Mary was young, gay, and quite naive in matters of love. She did not encourage me or refuse me, but I found her always on guard. She knew she had power over me, and she was clever enough to make proper use of it. She would neither understand my hints nor give me time to make a direct explanation. She told me years later that, from the moment she discovered my regard for her, the thought had been agreeable to her. She had often had an impression she could not account for, that sooner or later she would be mine. Let me return now to my voyage. All my old melancholy returned. Although I knew I deserved all the punishment I had received, and that the captain would have been justified in punishing me even more, I felt in my heart that I had been grossly injured. This worked so against my pride and wicked heart that I actually made plans to take the captain's life. That was one reason I was willing to prolong my own. Sometimes I was divided between which of the two I would do, take his life or take my own. I was capable of anything. I hadn't the least fear of God, nor the least sense of conscience. I was sure that after death I would merely cease to be. All my troubles would be over. But some days I would have better thoughts. A ray of hope would come in, although I doubted that I would ever see better days or return to England to marry my Mary. My love was the only restraint I had left. I could not bear the idea that she might think bad thoughts of me when I was dead. That single thought, which oddly had not held me back from 1,000 smaller evils, proved to be the only thing preventing me from trying to kill the captain. How long I could have continued fighting this battle I do not know. But the Lord, whom I little thought of, knew my danger and was even then providing for my deliverance. While I was still in Plymouth, I determined 2 things. 1, that I would not go to India, and 2, that I would go to Guinea. That turned out to be the Lord's will for me, but he accomplished both his way, not mine. We had been at Madeira for some time. The business of the fleet was completed, and we were to sail the following day. On that memorable morning I stayed late in bed. I would have slept even longer, but one of the midshipmen, an old companion, came down and, half joking and half seriously, told me to get up. When I did not leap to obey his order, he cut the hammock down. I was angry, but I didn't dare let him know it. It was strange that this person, who made no profession of knowing why he did what he did, was the one distinct messenger of God's provision for my needs. I said nothing further to him, and went up on deck. That moment I saw a man putting his clothes into a boat. He told me he was leaving ship. When I asked him why, he said that 2 men from a ship from Guinea had asked to be transferred to the Howick. The Commodore of the fleet, Sir George Pocock, had ordered my captain to send 2 from our ship to take their place. At once I saw my chance. I begged that the boat would be detained for a few minutes and ran to the lieutenant. I pleaded with him to intercede with the captain that I might be the second man. Though I had been on poor terms with these officers and had disobeyed them at every turn, they did pity me and consented to allow me to transfer. In little more than half an hour from my awakening in my hammock, I was discharged from serving aboard the Howick and was safely installed on board another ship. That was one of the many critical turns in my life in which the Lord was pleased to show his concern for me by causing totally unexpected circumstances to concur in almost an instant of time. He did this several times, and each time brought me into an entirely new scene of action. Each incident was usually delayed to almost the very last moment in which it could have taken place. The ship I boarded was bound for Sierra Leone and the adjacent parts of what is called the windward coast of Africa. My new commander was acquainted with my father, and he received me very kindly. I believe he would have been my friend if I had acted in any kind of decent manner. But I had not yet learned my lesson. In fact, I acted much worse than I did on board the Howick. I remember that when I was in the dinghy passing from one ship to the other, I was really rejoicing in the exchange. I was going to live the life I pleased, without any control. From that time on, I became totally corrupt. Not only did I sin, but I got others to sin with me. One natural result of my corruption was that I lost the good opinion of my new captain. Not that he was at all religious or that he disliked my wickedness, but I became careless and disobedient. I didn't please him because I didn't want to please him, and because he was a man with an odd temper, we easily disagreed. Besides, I had a clever streak that got me into more trouble every time I indulged it. Once I imagined that he had insulted me, and I made up a song in which I ridiculed his ship, his intentions, and his person. I taught it to the whole ship's company and made him a laughing-stock. I was that kind of ungrateful person. Of course, he knew all about the song and who composed it. I went on like that for about 6 months. As our ship was preparing to leave the coast, our captain died. I was not on much better terms with his mate, who now succeeded to the command. He had been mean to me before, and I had no doubt that if I went with him to the West Indies, he would put me on board a man of war. And that, from what I had heard, was more dreadful than death. To avoid it, I knew I would have to remain in Africa. One other man I knew of had arrived on this coast in very much the same condition. He had gone into the business of purchasing slaves from up country and selling them to the ships at advanced price. He had recently been in England and was returning on the ship I was in. He owned 1/4 of it. His example impressed me with hopes that I could do the same. I arranged with him to come and work, and on that agreement obtained my discharge from the ship. I did not take the precaution of prearranging the terms of my employment. I merely trusted his generosity, and I received no payment from the captain of the ship for my services. He just gave me a bill which I could present to the owners of the ship when I got back to England. I was never paid, because the company went bankrupt before I could return. The day the vessel sailed, I landed on the island of Benanos with little more than the clothes on my back. It was as if I had escaped a shipwreck. And that's the end of chapter 4, friends. Next week we will continue with chapter 5. God bless you all.